It started innocently enough, a dull ache in his stomach. It wasn't hunger exactly, more like an emptiness, a gnawing sensation that didn't go away. At first he thought it was just stress, maybe an off day, but it didn't subside. It grew, deepening into a craving that nothing could quell. He ate, a sandwich for lunch, a hearty steak for dinner, snacks, fruit. His cravings became insatiable, and yet no matter how much he consumed, the emptiness remained. His stomach stretched, bloated, aching, but it was a hollow pain, like something was missing. His body, once toned and healthy, began to change. His skin turned pale, stretched over bones that felt more brittle by the day. His face thinned. His eyes, once bright, sank into dark sockets. But the hunger didn't stop. It began to eat at him from the inside out. He woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his body shaking. He clawed at his stomach, desperate for relief, but nothing worked. He devoured anything he could find, raw meat, stale bread, anything. But each meal felt like it only made things worse. The gnawing grew stronger, more frantic, until it felt like his very bones were craving something far darker than food. It wasn't long before he started noticing the changes. His fingers began to ache, the joints snapping and popping in unnatural ways. His nails thickened, turning jagged and black like claws. His skin rippled under his touch, as if something was moving just beneath it. His teeth began to grow sharper, his gums receding to accommodate them. He could feel his body twisting, warping, as though it was trying to become something else, something not human. One evening, after consuming his fifth meal of the day, he collapsed in front of the mirror, his body shaking uncontrollably. His stomach was distended, grotesque, but the hunger still lingered, deeper now, gnawing at him with a violent insistence. His reflection was monstrous. His face had elongated, the skin stretching taut and pale. His once dark hair had fallen out, leaving patches of raw, irritated scalp. His eyes glowed with an unsettling feral hunger, eyes no longer human. He stared at the reflection, a raw scream bubbling in his throat, but no sound came. His jaw began to crack painfully, splitting apart as his skull reshaped itself. His face grew angular, his features sharpening. His mouth tore open wider, wider than it should have, the skin around it stretching and cracking as new jagged teeth pushed through his gums like something desperate to escape. He could feel the change. His skin was thickening, turning leathery, like the hide of an animal. His body shrank, bones cracking and snapping into new shapes. He staggered back from the mirror, his fingers now clawed, scraping across the walls as he stumbled toward the door. The hunger roared inside him, drowning out any remaining shred of his humanity. Then it came, the uncontrollable urge, the need for flesh. He wasn't even aware of how he'd gotten outside. The night air was cold against his skin, but he barely registered it. All he could think of was the scent, the smell of warm blood, of human flesh. He could hear the pulse of a heartbeat, strong and steady, just around the corner. A man, alone, walking down the street, unaware of the predator that stalked just behind him. The Skinwalker, still wearing the tattered remnants of what used to be a man, moved with unnatural speed, its feet silent on the pavement. He reached out with his clawed hands, fingers trembling with anticipation. His new, elongated tongue flicked out from between his jagged teeth, tasting the air as he closed the gap between himself and the prey. The man turned just in time to see the monstrous thing leap at him, but it was too late. The Skinwalker sank its claws into his chest, tearing through flesh with a sickening rip. Blood poured in hot streams, splattering across the concrete. The man screamed, but it was a desperate, useless cry as the creature yanked him to the ground. With a brutal snarl, the Skinwalker sunk its teeth into the man's throat, tearing through muscle and bone with savage abandon. Blood spilled, warm and thick, coating the creature's face, dripping down its chin. It didn't stop. It couldn't. The hunger raged like wildfire inside him, gnawing at his insides, demanding more. His hands, now grotesque, reached for the man's flesh, tearing strips away with animalistic ferocity. The creature consumed hungrily, tearing through the man's body as if it were little more than meat. It was as though the very act of feeding was not just satisfying, it was a rebirth, a return to something primal, something older than humanity. The body was devoured, stripped down to its bare bones in mere minutes, blood splattered across the sidewalk in gruesome pools. The Skinwalker, its hunger sated for a brief moment, stood over the remains, its chest heaving, its body trembling with the aftershocks of the feeding. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The hunger continued to burn within, deeper now, coiling through its veins. The man was gone. The Skinwalker stood alone in the dark, its body still shifting, still changing. And with each breath, it could feel the transformation creeping further, taking root in every inch of its being. It was no longer a man, it wasn't even human. It was a predator cursed to feed forever, to hunt, to kill, to devour. The hunger would never end. And as it looked down at the broken corpse, the Skinwalker's hollow eyes burned with the promise of more flesh, more blood, more life to consume. It turned and disappeared into the night, vanishing into the darkness, its insatiable hunger echoing in the silence.